Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Dialogue. I'm Taimur Shamil. Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi was on his visit to China to attend the strategic dialogue with his counterpart, Mr. Wang Yi, and both countries talked about important aspects, as Foreign Minister himself said before going to China. They discussed range of issues: China-Pakistan economic corridor, Kashmir, Afghanistan, pandemic, and much more was discussed in this strategic dialogue. Now, this strategic dialogue was the second meeting. The previous strategic dialogue, the first strategic dialogue took place in March 2019. Both countries have been working on mega economic activity, that is China-Pakistan economic corridor. That is a concern for both. Security is also one of the key aspects of the strategic dialogue, as we also saw that some of the top Pakistani military officials were also accompanying Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi. We'll be discussing about Pakistan-China relations in the context of the changing regional dynamics. We have seen the spoilers, the way they have been working to sabotage China-Pakistan economic corridor, the way they have been instigating terrorism and extremism in Afghanistan for that matter. Although the talks have been there between the Taliban and the United States, but there are some elements, spoilers, who don't want peace in Afghanistan, who don't want peace in the region for that matter. CPEC stands for peace and stability, but then there are spoilers. Pakistan and China working on the strategic dialogue would address the issues related to development and also to security. We are joined by our special guest in the studios, and we'll be discussing about all these things. Our first guest is Dr. Shabir, renowned expert on China and on South Asian politics. Welcome to the show, Dr. Shabir. We're also joined by Ms. Saima Shabir, renowned senior journalist and expert on Pakistan's foreign policy. Welcome to the show, Saima.
Thank you.
We're joined by Syed Muhammad Ali. He's an expert on international affairs. He's joined us on Skype from Washington, D.C. I welcome Mr. Syed Muhammad Ali as well. Dr. Shabir, starting with this visit of a foreign minister, strategic dialogue. First of all, how do you see this strategic dialogue? This was the second meeting. What was primarily the focus of this dialogue?
I think this is a very a development that must be looked for by Pakistan, because now as we have this dialogue, now this dialogue is institutionalized with regard to Pakistan-China relations. Like, they discussed security issues, they discussed development issues, they discussed bilateral issues, economic issues, economic cooperation, connectivity, regional issues, and as well as the global issues that affect this region, and of course China-Pakistan. So I think this is a welcome development as far as Pakistan is concerned. So when there is a important developments in the region, like we have problem in Kashmir. India is asserting, India is actually on with the atrocities inside Kashmir.
Right.
There's a development in Afghanistan. There's a development in between China and India on Ladakh front. So there are regional situations, and likewise we have global developments too. Recently we have seen US having a diplomatic catastrophe in shape of rejection by Security Council members. So there are developments, and in the developments that global and region development, it's very important to have a strategic dialogue between China and Pakistan. Now, it is when our foreign minister goes there. So as we've seen reports or press release that joint statement that came up, I think this is very welcoming that China has backed all Pakistan's core issues. Pakistan has stood by China on all issues of their interest. So I think there's a mutual consensus between China and Pakistan over various issues that we both countries face regionally and globally.
Right. And Mr. Ahmed, interesting thing was that both talked about Kashmir, and China has also said that they do not support, rather they condemn any unilateral decision taken by any country in the region. Now, today's newspapers in India were full of the statement, So Pakistan and China are focusing on Kashmir, and the way China has supported Pakistan and bringing up this issue of Kashmir at Security Council is pretty commendable. How do you see this development, specifically on Kashmir?
Well, thank you, Taimur. I would like to endorse your statement, as you said, that on Kashmir, the stance from our neighboring countries, it is really very important. Especially what happened with China and Pakistan at the same time. So no one can, even China or Pakistan, both cannot ignore Kashmir. China is also facing the same pace from India as Pakistan is facing. So China is not at that point right now where India can, mongering towards the war to China. What they have done with at the border with China, China has replied to them. I think quite it was very good message to the whole world. So now coming towards Kashmir, I think so Kashmir's issue is open to everyone. It is there is nothing to hide. Whatever is happening in Kashmir, it is in front of everybody. Even the human rights violations, they have been not condemned only by our neighboring countries or by the Islamic countries. It has been for the first ever time, it has been taken up in the European Union, it has been taken up all over the world, that what is happening and what is going on in the Kashmir, it is totally unacceptable. So now at this point of time, when China is standing with Pakistan, I think this is a big win-win situation for Pakistan, and even it is a hope for the Kashmiri people as well, that the whole strategically the region, not only Pakistan but China itself, which is an emerging power, it is taking a side towards Kashmir. And I think it is also making Pakistan's position very powerful on the issue of Kashmir, that we have focused on Kashmir, we have played well on Kashmir, we have made the world realize that what is the actual situation in Kashmir going on, and how India is playing its dirty game in Kashmir. So I think so that is very welcoming remarks from the China, and we should have more confidence, and we can play our sentiments, and we can play our diplomatic role with more positivity, with more confidence toward the world.
Right.
That's what I would like to say.
And Dr. Shamil, other developments that are taking place in the region are Afghanistan. One of them is Afghanistan, and both foreign ministers talked about Afghanistan. It is important for us because we are directly and indirectly affected by what is happening in Afghanistan. Looking at this political situation, even the security situation, I would say the situation is fragile at the moment. How do you think that Pakistan and China would address the issue in Afghanistan? What are the contours that they are working on?
Right, it's very important to have peace in Afghanistan. It's not only important for Pakistan because we have a long border with we share a long border with Afghanistan, but it's also important for China. You see, China was reluctant in taking part in any development work inside Afghanistan until they asked until the move out of the forces, American forces there. So the peace, in fact, when China looks at Afghanistan, it looks at actually Belt and Road Initiative taking place. Since our situation in Afghanistan directly impacts the Belt and Road Initiative, because since it's about connectivity, so you cannot have connectivity and development when you're not at peace. So it's very important for China to have peace in Afghanistan. It's very important for Pakistan to have peace in Afghanistan because we want our western border to be at peace. And I think there are problems being faced by US inside Afghanistan, but the arrangement that we look and we see in Afghanistan, we look at it as far as my assessment is concerned. Things have to shape up well if they have to have peace. Probably the various factions, various stakeholders in Afghanistan will have to come on a comprehensive dialogue and all-encompassing dialogue, intra-Afghan parties dialogue to have peace in Afghanistan.
So once peace is restored, we'll be looking forward to having China, Pakistan, BRI for that matter, in Afghanistan, and regional connectivity order
Yes.
that can help Afghanistan.
Yes. Unless there's a peace in Afghanistan, Central Asia will be dicey, and various other countries will be BRI. It's very important for China to have very peaceful Afghanistan.
Right. Mr. Ali, talking about this strategic dialogue, how do you see Pakistan-China strategic partnership and the changes that are taking place in the region? Mr. Ali, I think there is some technical issue. We can't hear you. Right. 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 Mr. Ali, my question is, I would just repeat my question. I think there is some technical issue. How do you see the strategic partnership between Pakistan and China and the recent strategic developments in the region?
Can you hear me now?
I think there is some technical issue. Saima, how do you see this? While we discuss Afghanistan, it is not just Afghanistan that we see is in turmoil at the moment. We see aggression from different sides, Pakistan specifically. As you mentioned earlier, India has been showing aggression to China, interestingly, to at some point Nepal as well. They don't have a smooth relationship with Bangladesh either, with Sri Lanka for that matter. At one point, Indian Prime Minister was of the view that we are going to diplomatically isolate Pakistan, but we don't see that happening anymore. Rather, we see we see India getting isolated diplomatically, and both Pakistan and China are concerned about the aggression that India is showing to Pakistan, to China, and to Afghanistan for that matter. Because recently, the attacks that took place in Afghanistan that were claimed by ISIS had Indian citizens who were part of that attack.
Well, Taimur, it has not happened for the first time. Let me tell you, it has been happened in the past as well. When there was ISIS was being established over there, so there were many RAW and NDS agents. They were being, if you recall the incident that mother of bombs that was being dropped, and there were Indian citizens who were being killed and their coffins had been returned to India. So what they were doing over there, so it was a question, and the debate was going on that. So no one can deny that India has never been sitting in Afghanistan for the reconciliation or for the peace purpose. Obviously, India does not want peace in this region to serve their own purposes. But right now, Afghanistan should also realize this thing, that Belt and Road Initiative, it is not in the benefit of only Pakistan and China, but it is, or Central Asia, but it is in the benefit of Afghanistan itself. So what we are seeing right now, the whole scenario has been turned, I would like to call it an oxymoron, an upside down situation, that India was diplomatically, it was saying everywhere that we are going to isolate Pakistan, but right now India is facing the same situation as it used to be trying to make for Pakistan. I would not like to be reluctant over here to even to say that US was supporting India against Pakistan. At one side, we see that independently, if we observe, so at one side, US was standing by with Pakistan, but at the other side, it was also having economic interest with India. So there was a double game going on between America and India, and now it is no more a hidden agenda or hidden game. You can see it, whether it is in the UN Security Council, whether it is overall in the overall in the dialogues. So you can say whatever has happened in Kashmir, US cannot testify that. Even whatever had happened in on the borders of India, US cannot back India on its deeds. So what we see now, that even US is having its grip lost on India, and India is not having a side from US as well, what I feel like. So I think India has been completely failed, and Afghanistan should know, and Afghanistan should realize this thing, that now India is no more a goon of this territory. The region, if the region is going to be in peace, so there will be more prosperity, economic stability. It will not be only for Pakistan, it will be for Afghanistan, for South Asian states, Central Asian states, for China, and for the whole region. We should say that.
We have been talking about the western border, Dr. Shabir, but talking about the eastern platforms, I would say, regional platforms like Shanghai Cooperation Organization, SAARC, ASEAN for that matter, there has been a point where India has been dominating SAARC and other regional diplomatic platforms. In recent developments, Prime Minister Imran Khan had a phone call with Bangladeshi Prime Minister. So that was an interesting development. Nepal has been, giving statements that are in Pakistan's favor for that matter, and because India has been showing aggression to Nepal as well. How do you think that Pakistan and China can collectively explore more diplomatic options in the East?
Right. When we talk of these regional arrangements like SAARC and SCO, we find that the countries who are stronger economically or diplomatically, they actually prevail in these on these forums. Very recently, Pakistan and India joined as members of SCO, but Pakistan has, since with support of China, Pakistan has a stronger position. But when we look at the Indian attitude, so I think for a long time, the countries in SAARC, like smaller nations in SAARC or in South Asia, were exercising reluctance, or they were actually, but now time has changed. Like you mentioned about Nepal, they were very aggressive in their statements against India, and things have changed. But when we talk diplomatically, we have to be very, very aggressive in diplomacy when we talk of issues. Like in my opinion, since last August 5, Pakistan has been very aggressive in diplomacy, and there are successes on diplomatic front. Like we have been able to internationalize Kashmir issue, and now people realize that this is a flashpoint, and we must address this issue. So this is a diplomatic
and expose
success.
India's aggression as well, to other countries.
We have been able to, but world has to do a lot more, right? We have been exposing, but for the last 1 year, that India actually has started unprecedented atrocities in Kashmir. We have been able to expose India's suppressive and atrocities in Kashmir,
Right.
and that is what is aggressive diplomacy, and we have to continue. So we can expect some good news at these regional forums like SAARC. But I think since countries have their interest, like. Maybe we have a support of China, but with India, various other countries, they have their own interests. And when they come to bilateral issues, they actually see their own interests first, and then that issue. Like we were not very, we didn't have any big support from SAARC countries on Kashmir in last 1 year, and like from Arab countries also. But I think great effort has been made with regard to Kashmir, and we have been able to tell world that this is a serious issue, and this is serious human rights issue, and world and the region must address this issue.
Right, and Shamil, there was another very interesting development in this meeting. Pakistan has shown support to China on the issue of Xinjiang, Taiwan and Hong Kong. Now these are very sensitive issues for China, because they are being framed in a specific way by the Western media, by the regional media as well, and probably there might be some issues as well. But Pakistan's support on these issues and then China's support on Kashmir, how do you see this development?
Well, that is same thing, I think so, that Pakistan and China, both they are iron friends and iron brothers, as we used to say, and it has been, with the passage of time, it has been clear to the whole world that Pakistan always stands by China, and China always stands by Pakistan. I would like to share with you here that when there was the pandemic at its peak, nobody has visited China. Even there was a blame game going on from US and China. But Pakistan was the only country from where FM Qureshi Saab, he visited China, and we were standing by them. Our students were there, and we were not even, at their each thick and thin. As China has been standing with us, we were also been standing for us, and I would like to give a big hand for that. That Pakistan has been strategically always been with China. We need in the regions, being in the region, all the countries, neighboring countries, they obviously need each other. This is the need of the hour. This has been always been a need of the time. Right now, China is emerging power. Everybody knows that Pakistan is a good ally to China, and if this bloc, the new bloc which is going to be formed, if it is going to be formed, so God knows that where India and America will stand. So definitely they are right now, they are fighting for their own stability. If I will say, I would like to say that they are right now isolated. They want to be not to be isolated. As they were dictating the whole world, they are not in that position anymore. So seeing that Pakistan is standing with China, I think so this is a great message at this point of time and in the past as well.
Right. This point is very important, the strategic bloc, as you just mentioned. Mr. Ali, talking about this strategic bloc that Shama just mentioned, how do you see the developments in the region, and do you think that there is a new bloc coming up, emerging in South Asia under Chinese leadership, or that is led by Pakistan and China both?
Well, I mean, Pakistan's bilateral relationship with China, if you look at it historically, I mean, we've had nothing in common with China except a strategic alliance where, China has since the 60s certainly felt that there's a strategic rivalry with India, and they have, and we've developed all these, rhetorical niceties around it. But, at the end of the day, a communist country, a communist godless country, and the Islamic Republic of Pakistan became best friends with a friendship deeper than the deepest sea and sweeter than the sweetest honey, based on this realpolitik imperative, right? Where we also needed asymmetrically, to be able to compete with India, we needed China's backing. And China realized that instead of direct confrontation, they could support us. So it kind of worked out that way. Now, increasingly in this multipolar world, with China having gained a lot of strategic, importance, and remember, there's this broader strategic rivalry going on, between China and the US as well. And, and in this multilateral age of multilateral engagements, I mean, it's not like China has cut off ties with Saudi Arabia, right? I mean, it's tried. I think it was caught off guard with the Doklam incident. I think they don't want a complete rupture with India, but at the same time, they are also wary that the US is to a certain degree trying to use, India to counterbalance. The situation is multi-layered, and I think from Pakistan's perspective, we need to get away from seeing things in black and white. Because, when, for instance, I mean, I want to, Taimur, allude to your earlier point on, Pakistan, supporting China on Hong Kong and Taiwan and Xinjiang. But look at the apparent contradiction there, and the rest of the world is calling us out on that, right? They say that Pakistan becomes very agitated and upset about the fate of Muslims everywhere in the world except in our neighborhood, right? And, there's another, I think, for sort of, if we're thinking national interest, Pakistan's national interest, there is also, if we look at the situation in Kashmir, this is an issue where 70 years of conflict have not solved the situation. Right? And right now what's happening in India is clearly...
Mr. Ari, you talked about Pakistan's stance on Xinjiang and Hong Kong. You rightly said that the world has a different view. Many countries have a different view. But at the same time, those same countries won't talk about Kashmir. They won't talk about human rights violations anywhere else, because when it comes to them, it's about their economy, it's about their vested interest. So this duplicity somehow prevails in the international system. Pakistan has a choice, and Pakistan would make a choice. How do you see Pakistan making such kind of choices?
Right. I mean, and I think that's a great question. And yes, so I mean, I do agree with the fact that, there is duplicity. Unfortunately, things like human rights are sort of used often to gain political mileage, to justify much more sort of realpolitik issues. But even from the realpolitik angle, you see when Pakistan expresses its support for the one China policy and the Xinjiang situation, it undermines our sort of concern about what's happening in Kashmir, because India and China use similar language when it comes to what they are doing in those autonomous areas, right? So I mean, China talks about the need to quash terrorism, right? In terms of how it's handling the Xinjiang situation. India also says the same thing, that we had to take Kashmir into our folds because that's the only way to get rid of terrorism. That is the only way to develop Kashmir. Whereas we feel that they will flood it, perhaps they'll change the demographics of the area, right? But if we have this duplicity, then we have a tough time reconciling. And it's not to say that other countries don't. I mean, look at the US, which still aspires to be, a paragon of sort of human rights, etc., and it has like deep-seated issues with race, and a lot of other social justice issues. But these are sort of, when we are talking and we get very emotional about this bilateral relationship, I think there is some need for caution, right? There is some need for sort of discernment when we are addressing
Mr. Ali, my last question, and then we'll take a break. How do you see China's strategic ambitions in the region? Of course, Pakistan and China are working on China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, a huge BRI ambition for that matter, and recently China's deal with Iran for that matter. How do you see this development? India got dropped out of the railway project, Chabahar railway project. China is getting more space in the region. So how do you see Chinese ambitions?
Well, I mean, there's certainly a lot of attention, here in the US also, people watching that situation closely. And, China's investment in Chabahar was minuscule compared to the apparent, and there's, right now it's like leaked newspaper stories and, right, I mean, at the end of the day, let's see what happens over the next 25 years. But the scale of the Iran-China deal is much more, much greater. And there are people who kind of see this as China's attempt to push to perhaps push India out. But at the same time, China, and this is the multilateral world, that, at the same time that they're kind of strategically competing, they are also not burning bridges. I mean, China doesn't want to look like it wants to burn a bridge with India, and neither does Iran. I mean, remember, Iran and India have had, if you look at the Northern Alliance in Afghanistan, they had been working together, right? I mean, all those years against the Taliban. So, Iran and India also have long-standing ties, and Iran would not want, to completely cut its ties with India. And then there's
the choices that India has made, Mr. Ali, in Afghanistan specifically, that completely perhaps contradicts Iranian ambitions, Chinese ambitions, Russian ambitions in Afghanistan, because somehow at this moment India is being part of the problem in Afghanistan and not part of the solution. Do you see it that way?
No, I don't. I mean, because I don't know in what context. I mean, yes, there is, there's a fear that, there's restiveness in our country happening through Afghanistan. But, India has made the largest economic investment in Afghanistan and in trying to use Afghanistan as a strategic buffer, as we've used. And they have diverged with Iran, for instance, because Iran, Qatar, all these countries have learned to start dialoguing with the Taliban, and India has still been reluctant to do that. Is that what you are referring to as the strategic mistake in Afghanistan?
So we'll be discussing about this after this break. India's footprint in Afghanistan and the way they have been collaborating with other countries, if they have been at all. But after the break, we are also going to discuss about 13 out of 15 members of United Nations Security Council have opposed United States push for sanctions on Iran, arms embargo on Iran, and this is a significant development. Many Iranians are of the view that this is a big blow to the American diplomacy in the region, because of this, Iran would be able to buy arms from major countries, Russia for that matter, and China. And we know that Iran has been thwarting the American order in the region. What is going to be the future of the regional security, Iran and US relations? We're going to discuss that after this break. Stay with us. Welcome back. So 13 out of 15 members at the United Nations Security Council have voted against the arms embargo on Iran. And for the Iranians, this is a major development. Dr. Shabir, how do you see this development? And primarily, a lot of people perceive this issue as that China has been backing, of course, Iran at Security Council and otherwise as well, because both countries have similar strategic goals when it comes to to the regional politics. How do you see this?
I think it's a very important development of this week that 13 out of 15 Security Council members have voted against American plan. So this is a very welcome development for Iran, and they're very, of course, they have to be very excited about this development. In my opinion, one way of looking at this is that whosoever is trying to make diplomatic efforts, enemy of my enemy is my friend, right. Formula one, but there's a change in global mindset. Global powers probably are thinking differently now.
Even a lot of Europeans' power.
Yeah, they some of them have abstained, and some of them have voted against. So there's a major mindset change of mindset. So and we saw in recent months that China also has been striking deal with Iran. Russia is coming closer to Iran. So there is going to be a regional implication for this. When we look at this region, but there are global implications too. Like we don't say that American power is waning or it is but I think China is always like in the joint statement they also mentioned multilateralism. So they and today was, I think there was a the 13 votes as a kind of reflection of multilateralism. And probably failure of unilateralism. So this is going to be great change in the world. I think this event, this is going to be very eventful, and I think it will change, make various other changes in future too.
Right.
Regionally and
Mr.
globally.
How do you see this development? And so, if there is no arms embargo on Iran, we also know that Iran has been ambitious, historically.
Yeah.
And some strategists might also call Iran expansionist to some extent. Gulf states too have been
So true.
like that
So
in the past still. And this rivalry that is going on between Iran and the Gulf states. So, how do you see the arms embargo in the context of this Arab world and Iran rivalry?
Well, the arms embargo to some extent that was, in the benefit of the region. But now I would like to mention two things over here. Number one, the corona issue, which has been exposed to, to many nations that human rights are far more important than these embargoes, than these, armed race, etc. As Iran was facing a lot of trouble during the pandemic, and there were voices among the world that there shouldn't be, the sanctions shouldn't be right now, they shouldn't be imposed for some reason. Iran should be benefited from like rest of the world in the during the pandemic, but it couldn't had happened. So I think from that angle, Iran could have been made, more good relations from other countries, and they could get attraction from other countries. Number one. Number two, the issue of Kashmir as well, that has been seen from the after this 5th of August 2019, that has been taken up as the humanitarian rights violation issue. Earlier it was bilateral issue between Pakistan and India, but now it has been taken world over that no, it is the issue of the human rights violation in Kashmir, that people are facing troubles and they are facing the huge army in India. So I think so the whole dynamic of the after this pandemic, the whole dynamics of the politics has been changed. Now if you see geostrategically, Iran, if it has been embargoed, I think to some extent it was okay, but after that, if it is a push from the US, this is now people don't want. The world globally does not want it. That has been, shown in the current scenario as well. That 13.
Right. And Mr. Ali, how do you see this development that 13 out of the 15 members of Security Council have voted against the arms embargo? This development, do you think that is a blow to the American diplomacy?
Well, I mean, it's a bit of an embarrassment, but there's been a lot of recent embarrassments when it comes to U.S. foreign policy, some of these moves also have to be understood in the context of domestic political compulsions. I mean, remember, we are now heading into elections. A very polarized debate is taking place. In terms of foreign policy, also. President Trump came in with the promise of undoing Obama's work, in patching through with Iran, and he thought that he could get a better deal. I mean, he realizes that, that deal is not really possible, and now he is, he's ramping up sort of, the aggression towards Iran. The Europeans have been much more cautious. I mean, leaving aside Russia and China, who, don't give a lot of heed to sort of, the multilateral arrangement. The Europeans have been much more cautious, and there's various technical arguments around sort of, even the ability of the US to evoke sanctions after it had itself walked out of the deal. Right, but I mean, of course, the US still is, is a very powerful country with a lot of influence at the multilateral level. And, depending on where the situation goes, if, for instance, Biden comes along, who has a similar approach to the Iran problem as, Obama did. But it's a complicated situation. I mean, for instance, with his choice of and nomination of the vice president, while she has taken, been known to take India to task on Kashmir, is also very close to the pro-Israeli lobbies within the US. So how is that going to then, articulate a new approach, American approach towards rapprochement with Iran and the containment of Iran vis-a-vis now other regional developments, the UAE cozying up with Israel, it is going to be a complex and an interesting situation to watch, especially over the coming months.
Right, and this development is significant for Iran because Iran could buy arms from Russia, from China, and we also know that Iran has been ambitious in the past. Then there is this rivalry between the Iranians and the Gulf countries. How do you see this whole situation, Iran's ambitions for that matter?
Well, I mean, Iran has been, I mean, it certainly has, I mean, ambitions, and it's been using proxies. I mean, in Syria, in
Iraq for that
Lebanon,
matter.
and elsewhere.
Afghanistan.
Afghanistan as well, but I mean, Afghanistan has had a terrible sort of history with interference, and I mean, there they were actually supporting the Northern Alliance, right? I mean, the only opposition to the Taliban when the Taliban came to power, and when they were trying to sort of quash everyone else with the use of force.
Right.
So, I mean, but yeah, I mean, be it Hezbollah, be it sort of, in Syria, they have inflicted a lot of damage, and Russia and Iran supporting the Bashar al-Assad regime. I mean, it's caused a lot of sort of unnecessary suffering in that country.
Right, right. Mr. Ali, thank you for joining us. Pleasure having you on the show. Dr. Shabir, thank you for your time. Pleasure having you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Saima, for joining us. Pleasure having you on the show. That's all from today's dialogue. See you next time. Khuda Hafiz.